Hello, you're listening to Ready, Set, Go Real Estate Investing Podcast, presented by Brandon Elliott. This show will be going over all aspects of real estate investing and is intended to educate, motivate, and prepare you to take action on your first or next real estate investment. For more information, please visit BrandonElliottInvestments.com. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Welcome back, everyone, to Ready, Set, Go Real Estate Investing Podcast. I am your host, Mr. Brandon Elliott. Very excited today. We have a special guest, somebody that's been in the industry the last few years that has been crushing it, literally has done over 18 million in transactions when it comes down to turnkey investment properties. And this is more on the East Coast, but Midwest area, nationwide, you name it. This woman is amazing. She's been doing, I think she trains, right, for flights, which is awesome. A big flyer, which is cool. Mm-hmm. And she's got a book out that we'll be able to plug at the end, so you can definitely get a copy of that. But yeah, she's really had a lot of success in the turnkey industry, and we want to be able to bridge the gap for you guys today. So without further ado, Ali, what is up? How are you?
I'm good. I said it before we started recording. I'm so excited. I've never done a live to Facebook podcast recording, so I'm elated.
Yeah, let's go, right? I'm excited. I'm super blessed to have you on. For anybody out there that doesn't know a little bit about your story or who you are, do you mind just diving into who you are, where you're from, and what the heck you're up to?
Sure. So the short of my story is I grew up in Georgia, typical mindset, go to school, get good grades, get a secure job, yada, 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 save all your money. So I started going down that route. I actually entered the aerospace and engineering industry. So that was my first kind of career path. And I tell the story all the time of the minute I walked into my very first cubicle, before I had ever sat down, I looked around and I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. Like, my soul left in that moment. And I had just been in school for years. I went to grad school, everything. And from that point on, I didn't know how to get out of corporate. And so I just started reading books. I was like, it looked like I was either going to have to start a business or invest in real estate. I didn't know what that looked like. So it was a 5-year journey of exploration to figure out how to get out of corporate. And towards the end of it, I had decided I was going to start a business, to be honest. And I didn't even know what kind of business. And in the midst of that, some real estate investing stuff came through my inbox just randomly. And I thought, well, while I still have a W-2 and a paycheck every Friday, I might as well do something smart with the money, because when I leave corporate, I'm not going to have that anymore. So I started investing in real estate, and it was actually not turnkeys, but pretty quickly through the networking and everything, I started hearing about turnkeys, because this was 2011. So this was in the middle of the crash. Everything was on sale. And one of the biggest markets at the time was Atlanta. I was already living in California at this point. I was like, well, Atlanta, I'm from there. So I decided to buy some properties for myself, and that started this whole thing. Everybody was suddenly wondering, what in the world are you buying? That, you think to buy real estate, you have to swing hammers, you have to flip, you have to rehab, all these complicated things.
Unclog toilets and all that other stuff.
Oh, yeah. They're like, how are you not unclogging toilets? And I was like, well, let me tell you, because I had just learned about turnkeys too, because my whole thing, even though I didn't really know it at the time, was I didn't want another job. I wanted to go hang out on the beach all day. So turnkeys kind of fit perfect, where I was able to be fairly hands off. And so one thing led to another. Everyone was asking me about it. Suddenly I started writing about it online. Bigger Pockets picked me up as a writer for them. And it became such a big thing, where that ended up being my ticket out of corporate, where I've now for 9 years have helped other people buy turnkeys. I helped kind of facilitate, act as an emotional support dog. And 9 years later, here I am.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's so cool. The story behind this too, it's like you worked your butt off. You knew what you knew at the time, right? And you were doing the corporate route. Right when you got there, it hit you, I think, a little bit faster than some others out there.
I didn't even sit down. I was like,
You're like, oh God, this is
no. All that school.
What I signed myself up for. So for anybody else out there that's like just not enjoying, that's just not their path, but they're kind of in it right now. They might feel stuck. They might feel like helpless, but they want to try to find that emergency line to get
anything else.
Anything, right? Like, you were like, hey, I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what kind of business, but I need to start something. And you started reading. And I think that's like the number one thing, right? you don't know anything until you start reading and figuring out the options out there. But what would you recommend for somebody that is in that situation that you were in and how to get out of that?
Well, conveniently, I put my recommendations in the book, so we'll plug that book. But it's actually so. Once it all happened, so like I said, I spent 5 years because at that point I had a lot of skills. I knew how to fly airplanes. I could teach people to fly airplanes, aerospace engineering, all that kind of stuff. But none of the skills were like, it's not like I can just go, what am I going to start I don't know. I didn't want to start an airplane business. So I was starting from ground zero. I was like, I don't know what to do. So really the very first step, and whether you like reading books, whether it's podcasts, whatever it is, it's really just start exploring, because I think what happened is as I kept exploring things, certain things jumped out at me. So like one of the first books I read, as probably everyone listening to this, was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I was like, now his concepts, yes, I'm on board. Let me read more. So I read more of his books. And then I would, read something about flipping or whatever, like, so steer away from that. And kind of just because real estate investing is such a crazy industry, or if you're getting out of corporate, whatever, it's all confusing. There's no manual for it. We didn't learn any of it in school. So it's a matter of like just first figuring out what the options are and like really kind of focus on what things are calling to you. Like I want to go sit on the beach, so I'm not going to go flip properties or wholesale for that matter. Yeah, so it's really, start with the exploration, and then once you find those things, you kind of start narrowing it down. It's like, let me learn more about that thing. And then, once you kind of, it's like, oh, okay, that might be it. And this, if you're trying to be an entrepreneur or whatever, this real estate or entrepreneurship, it's that exploration and just getting more and more narrow until something kind of works out for you. People say like, how'd you choose turnkey rental properties? And I kind of hesitate to say, I don't think I chose them. I think they chose me. Like they kind of fell in my lap. But when I say it that way, it sounds like I didn't do any work for that. It's like, hang on, let me sit here. Oh, cool. I got my answer. It's like, do all the work. And for me, this isn't scientific, but I feel like when you do all that work and you set that intention and you drive towards that goal, your thing will come to you. Whatever that is to get you out of corporate, get you into real estate, whatever, what have you, because it's kind of how it happened with me.
No, I couldn't agree anymore. Honestly, like that's the first thing that I always recommend to people as well. That's like my number one tip is you don't know what you don't know. So
exactly.
At the end of the day, you got to dive into all the different options out there. There's 30 plus ways to make money in real estate.
Yeah.
If you acknowledge that and then you start diving into it and figure out what you resonate with time wise, finances, and what your end goal looks like, so that
and be honest about it too. That's one of the tricks is like, it sounds terrible that I say I want to go hang out at the beach all day and I want to sleep in. Like those are truly the things that bring me joy. And it's like, okay, if I'm too embarrassed or shameful to admit I want to sleep in, well, I'm going to force myself to go work on properties at 8 a.m. when I don't want to. And it's, being okay with whatever those desires are, whatever your reasons are, be honest about it and pick something that actually fits that instead of swimming upstream because you think you should kind of thing.
So good. That's so good. So let's talk about that first deal. What was the first property? I know it wasn't turnkey right away, right? But
this one's exciting.
What did that look like? Yeah.
Well, so that first property was actually a pre-construction development down in Nicaragua, the third world country.
Wow.
I'm like, it's like, well, I'm a go big or go home kind of person.
One of those emails, right, that came in and you're like, hey, let me see.
Like, sucker. No, actually, it was funny because, when I was kind of in this exploration phase of still trying to figure out, am I going to do real estate? Am I going to do whatever? Because I live in Los Angeles and I had a friend at the time who was in real estate and she knew an agent down in Orange County. And somehow we were talking about rental properties. And at this point, I had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't know how to run numbers. I didn't know what makes a good property. I had no idea what my plan was, but I kind of did one of those fake it till you make it type of things. And I kind of put on this I'm a professional investor face. And we went looking around possible rental properties in Orange County. And so, the cheapest property we looked at, and these were all trashed, like nasty, like disgusting. And the cheapest one we found was like $270,000 and $271 to be exact. And the rent on it was going to be $1,200 a month. And I was like, something about those numbers seems odd. Like, where do you profit off of that? And plus that's $270 just to get the distressed house. I have to rehab the whole thing or whatever. And I'm like, all for $1,200 a month. So I had this in my head of something didn't seem to work. So there I am sitting in my corporate cubicle. I had registered for every mailing list possible because I was so bored. And so all of a sudden, I think it was like a Think Realty or one of those things comes in, and it advertised beachfront bungalows for $99,000. And I was like, I do like the beach. And 99,000, I'm like, tell me more. I was like, no. I was like, okay, first of all, where's Nicaragua? I was like, I don't know. So I really just watched this webinar because I was bored and it sounded cool. And it seemed really legit. And I was like, this is odd. And there was a seller financing option. I was like, keep telling me more. And so I contacted the people and I was like, I like doing anything that'll ruffle feathers. And as soon as I tell anyone I'm buying property in a third world country, like, that's pretty funny. So they sent me a copy of the sales contract, and this was a big deal. Like Wyndham Hotels was in on it. Jack Nicklaus Golf Course Design was in on it. Like this was a pretty massive undertaking. So I get this contract and I just, here goes my engineering brain. I redline everything. I was like, I'll show these people they're a scam. Like I was certain it was a scam. There was no way that this was not a scam. Oh. And so I just kind of kept going with it. So I ended up going to meet one of the main people for it. And long story short, I ended up buying 2 properties in Nicaragua. And I can't tell you how much I love that country. I ended up going down there like 5 times. And and there were big time investors getting in on this thing. I mean, this was not, some mom and pop little thing. This was a big development. And I ended up losing all of it. The famous developer story, somehow the money all just disappeared. And some people had like millions of their own dollars in this. Fortunately, I was only with both properties combined, I was only about 40 grand in, which, it'd be nice to have that 40 grand now. But I also knew immediately from all that book reading, if this is my biggest loss in real estate, worse things can happen for sure. And it wasn't, and I started to get down on myself, like, wait, did I misjudge this? Like, am I just a moron? Like, one could argue, but like I said, there were big time this was a big thing, and Wyndham Hotels ended up pulling out. Jack Nicklaus ended up pulling out, obviously, but it was the famous developer story. And then, being in Nicaragua, it's not like you can contact the FBI here. Like US, you still, developers can kind of still skip town, but Nicaragua, you don't have a whole lot of enforcement going on. So yay, my very first deal out of the gate, 40 grand down the toilet.
hey, I have some horror stories as well. And usually it comes down to contractors. So I totally get it. But so tell me, what did you learn on that one? And how can other people not make that similar type of mistake?
Well, the big thing is that since I've been in real estate now for quite a while, I've met so many people, and even in the US with pre-construction, anytime you're dealing with pre-construction developers, that is honestly where I hear a lot of horror stories, even in the US. But I knew one person where basically the developers, same thing happened, and they skipped off to the Caribbean. The US at that point cares because it's in the US, but they also can't do a heck of a lot either.
Is there any type of documents that could potentially have secured you or saved you a little bit more that maybe have a lawyer look at?
One of the problems in the Nicaragua one was that in the contract, it was, I get confused on all the legal, but like arbitration type of thing. Like there was look, here's one thing I've learned is it doesn't matter how rock solid a contract is. If the guy disappears to another country, and I think that's, even tenant leases, for example, I've had tenants for my rental property, like the famous tenant story, they bounce and don't pay the last 30 days or whatever. I don't want to say I've grown a distrust for contracts, but I think there's some reality to them too, is that you can only do so much. Like if somebody really wants to skip off and do whatever, I don't know. You definitely have to have your contracts in, but yeah.
Yeah. If you're dealing with bad people, then unfortunately it can be a tough situation. So having that discernment, I guess, and really making sure that you're partnering up with the right people.
Who you're partnering with, and a huge lesson to everybody is don't judge yourself if something if you have a loss, because literally there's no big time successful real estate investor that I know of that hasn't had a big loss. And that's why I say if I only lose 40 grand in my whole journey, I'm really coming out pretty good.
Mine's 4 times that amount, 160. So just so you know. All right? So you're all right.
Well, and I think one of the biggest takeaways for me that I think is really important for people is I could sit here and look at it like I lost 40 grand, which technically I did. And rumor is I'm going to get that back. we'll see.
Yeah,
But,
me too.
it's kind of like, sometimes it's not always a black and white situation where, okay, 40 grand, look what 40 grand got me, because that Nicaragua deal is how I ended up in TurnKeys. It was through the same people and everything. It's how I got into TurnKeys. It's how I left my corporate job. It's how I've had my business for 9 years now. So I have made that 40 grand back tenfold, like easily. And, I got to go to Nicaragua 5 times, which is, I think it might still be my favorite country. So the experiences, what it got me. So, some people are so fearful of like, oh my God, what if I lose the money? Okay, yeah, for sure. Let's try and plan for that not to happen. But if it does happen, what lessons can you learn from it so you can do it better? Don't let it knock you out of the game, because some people just, I could have been like, oh, I hate real estate, which I was tempted a couple times.
A lot of people do that. It breaks my heart
all the time. It's, one of the reasons I wrote the book, we'll talk more about that later, is to try and give people a softer entrance into this industry, because for exactly what we're saying is, people go diving in, they don't have any instruction manuals and they have no idea what they're doing. They get into a strategy that's wrong for them. They end up getting burned and they leave the industry. And that is soul crushing, because it's like, no, there's so many awesome options. Go slower so you don't fry yourself from it.
And you could be like that 3 feet from gold type of mentality.
So close.
Like every time that I've been burnt or made a mistake, you learn from it. You take a sit back and you're like, oh God, that was horrible. Never do that again. You learn from it and then treat it as an expensive seminar. But moving forward, it's like the compound effect of that growth and learning, it can be really tremendous, just like it has with you, which is awesome.
Oh, yeah. It's all about perspective and perception, lessons learned. Be careful with pre-construction, but I don't regret it for a second, because everything I have today is because of that investment.
Okay. So let's talk about some like the next steps for you and what that looked like. Why TurnKey, and what did the first few look like for you?
Well, so it's funny because people, when they're asking about turnkeys or whatever, they'll say, because I'm one of the few, I feel like, of all the turnkey players, like all the different turnkey companies, I'm one of the only one that I know who actually started because I bought turnkeys. Most of them are just kind of in the turnkey business, but I was actually a turnkey buyer. And so people, they know that. And they're like, so, what's the cash flow look like on your properties? Or, what are your numbers? I'm like, you don't want to know. I'm like, I bought in Atlanta in the middle of the crash. So, I say that as a caveat to don't get excited that you can find these today, because you can't. So my very first turnkey, we'll call it my very first successful property, I still have it, is a 2-story, this cute yellow house. It's in a maybe B grade neighborhood, like a totally fine, clean, you can walk around at night, like a perfectly great little neighborhood. I bought it fully rehabbed with tenants, property managers in place. Like I didn't have to lift a finger, for $55,000. And at the time it was getting $975 a month in rent. So if you are familiar with running rental property numbers at all and knowing cash flow, that is a heck of a lot of cash flow. Yeah. And not to make it
2
worse.
and 3% rule. I mean, you're in there.
Yeah, blew that out of the water. I think at the time, I want to say it was like a 14% cap rate. Like you're lucky to get a 14% cash on cash at this point. This was a 14% cap rate. So that property, those numbers were already insane. And we actually just re-rented that property. It went through a turnover for $14.95. So I have this $55,000 fully rehabbed property that is now renting for basically $1,500 a month, which, I mean, it's laughable. I'm like,
in a great neighborhood.
You don't want to know.
I love it.
And in a good neighborhood, Atlanta. And then on top of it, because, and this is something, people they can be fearful or whatever. And you never want to invest in a market too soon, like before you know a boom is coming. But Atlanta was the absolute number one market at that time, and the boom, it was coming. And so because I was willing to invest in the crash when it was that cheap, I think that all of my properties that I bought in 2011, 2012 have somewhere between doubled and quadrupled in value, which is absurd. Yeah. It's like, this is why we don't talk about my properties, because you're not going to get
that.
Like, sorry.
Yeah. No, I love
that. I mean, that's what, and honestly, that's what put the bug in me. Like, I guess the addiction started with the Nicaragua properties because there was seller financing on those. So, here I am in a third world, gorgeous country. And I was like, I have to buy every property possible. So I ended up getting the beach bungalow and a home site. And then of course we lost that. But then with the turnkeys, it was just as exciting because that $55,000 property, it only took $10,000 to buy it. And, here I am making this absurd cash flow. I think the mortgage payment at that time was like $400 or something. Like, come on. I was like, I'm on borrowed time. I grabbed an investor partner. I was like, we have to get as many properties as possible because, once the boom happens, these aren't going to exist anymore. So that got the bug going. And that's, I think, my excitement about it. People were hearing me talk about it and they're like, what are you buying?
Yeah.
like, oh, you have no idea. And that's how the whole thing started.
I love that. So with just going back for a second, the Nicaragua properties, do you own the land anymore or totally like the?
I don't even know.
Yeah. Something good to look into after this.
Yeah, well, I think there was something, I don't think so. Okay. Because part of so some lawsuits started, they were trying to take this all to court, and the developer's actually not even legally allowed back in Nicaragua, which is hilarious because he's supposedly doing the development, which is not happening. He can't even physically be in the country. But there was something about whether you own the land or not, as far as like how much recourse you had. And I think, or if you had the deed, or there was some weird, I'll tell you, it's funny because for me being an engineer, like grad school level, I suck at details, and I especially suck at details and contracts. So if you're like me in that regard, always make sure somebody smarter than you helps you read your contracts, because that might have helped me along the way too.
The same way. I hear you. No worries.
I'm like, I just want to buy the house. I don't care about the details.
Yeah. Let's go. Okay. So since you got those amazing deals in Atlanta and they've appreciated a ton, you're making great cash flow, really like turnkey, the definition behind this is that you're investing the money and you don't need to worry about anything, right? Like for the most part, you got to manage slightly the property management, but it comes with property management, comes with tenant, typically fully remodeled, so you don't need to worry about those type of.
Well, and I do want to say something very important in that regard is so when all of this started, so turnkeys are, and they still are, and I'm one of the culprits of this. I have a Turnkeys 101 ebook that I call the definitive guide to hands-off rental properties. So hands-off is the idea of turnkey. But what I learned over the years, fortunately, I was not one of these people, but I have seen so many people, they hear hands-off, and it's like they don't think their brain has to be attached to their shoulders anymore. And it's like, in a perfect world, yes, everything would be taken care of for you. The property would come just as advertised. The property managers would do exactly their job. All of the parts are taken care of for you. But what I've seen is people take that hands-off thing way too seriously. And the two places that really comes into play is, number one, if you're buying one of these properties, I always say, if there's humans involved in the equation, there's room for error. So you have got to do the due diligence on properties. And I've known companies who offer turnkeys or whatever that say, don't do the due diligence, we'll do it for you. Don't, seriously? Like, you have got to be willing to do the due diligence, and it's like all the work is done for you, but you've got to wear the pants in the relationship, because this is your investment. And if you're trusting other people, that's, kind of one of those trust but verify thing.
Sure.
And so do the due diligence. Don't skimp on that, because who knows what. And then on the flip side, property managers notoriously suck. Absolutely notoriously suck. And even when they're great, they notoriously end up sucking at some point. And so I've hired and fired property managers on my property several times. Yep. And so you have to be willing to step in and do, you are the boss. It's like you run a business. This is your job. And if your employees aren't, and I kind of, it's hard to say, like, don't treat your property manager like they're your employee, but they kind of are.
They are.
And so, I have the biggest example I've heard is, I try and 6 months, couple of years later, check in. How's your property doing? And this one guy, I think he had bought a property in Indianapolis or something. And I said, hey, how's the property? And he was like, well, it's good, but the cash flow hasn't been what I thought it was. And I was like, well, what happened? Because the idea with turnkey is when you get it fully rehabbed, you shouldn't have a big cash flow hit for hopefully quite some time. And I was like, well, why? And he said, well, a couple of small things, but then the dishwasher, I don't remember what he said, but the dishwasher exploded, ruined the flooring, and it was $7,000. And I said, did you pay $7,000 to fix the flooring? He said, well, yeah. And I said, did you call your insurance company? Like, everyone loves when their dishwashers explode because you get new flooring. And he said, oh, I didn't think to do that. And, it's like he literally just spent $7,000 on what would have been a very obvious insurance claim. And yeah, in a perfect world, the property managers would have said, hey, call your insurance company. We'll work with the adjuster. But they happen to not suggest it. And, I've just seen so many people like ride the wave and not take charge. This is your investment. This is your business. This is your money. And you have to, so just keeping one eye on things. So I kind of went into more detail about that, but it's so important with turnkeys because I think one of the number one problems with turnkeys is people have this assumption that A, they're perfect, and B, you can be 100% hands off.
Yeah.
Don't, because but turnkey is only a method of buying. It's not perfect. Yeah. And, once you own it, it's like owning any other rental property. So you've got to be willing to be part of the process. Cause I've just seen, turnkeys are very inviting for people maybe who wouldn't otherwise get in the industry. Yeah. And, they're too passive and not willing to do, whatever's necessary to keep that investment performing.
Yeah,
that was a lot more long-winded than I planned, but I felt very passionate about it.
It's very good, very detailed.
Please, people, listen.
Yeah, it's so crucial. It really is. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody's going to care about your investment property more than yourself. So you can't be lazy about it. Just like you mentioned, it's like it is very attractive. It's very sexy to like somebody that's not totally interested in real estate, want to be very hands off. But you still like jumping into this, it's only going to be super rewarding if you take action and manage the manager, make sure that you have systems in place. It's very critical. So
and maybe, and I say that in a lot of cases, it works out just as perfectly as it's advertised. And that's great. It's more of like, you have to have a willingness to step in if you need to step in.
Sure. So let's talk about maybe step by step. Like if somebody wanted to, they have a little bit of money saved aside, they want to get into real estate. They want some turnkeys. That's what's attracted to them. What does that look like for them to actually get started from beginning to end, possibly? Roughly?
So, it's pretty easy. One of the big things I help people with is if you've never been through the turnkey buying process, it's confusing because you don't know what you don't know. It's like, well, I don't even know what the next step is. But once you've been through the process once, it's so straightforward and easy. Like once I got one under my belt, I was like, oh, bring it. And so basically, it's kind of fun because it's like, I don't know if you like shopping online, but you basically get to shop online for your property. So the big thing is, one of the most confusing things is who to work with. And I won't go into massive detail about that, but there's two kinds of turnkey companies. There's the direct turnkey provider. They're the ones who are buying the properties, rehabbing them. You're buying directly from that person. There's also turnkey marketing companies, sometimes called turnkey promoters. And they work with, which is basically what I've become. I didn't even mean to, but I've become one, is I work with direct providers. And so like the difference of who you go to is like, if you go to the direct provider and say, I'm a new investor, I want to buy a property, what market's best for me? They're going to be like, well, this one, because this is where I work. They're the more technical oriented kind of people. They're flippers, basically. They're flipping off these properties to investors. Whereas if you work with a marketing company, I'm more like market agnostic, if you want to call it that. So like if you come to me and say, hey, I'm a new investor, I have X number of dollars to invest. What's your recommendation? I can give you different options. Like, well, we have this provider in Birmingham, or we have this provider in Houston. Here's the difference between the properties. We work in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Those are urban row houses versus like Kansas City might be suburban single family. It's like, and some people one or the other. So those are the kind of companies. So, part of, going way back to the beginning when we started talking is it's exploration again. Like I tell people, like, of course, I'd love for you to work with my company, but just look up all the companies and see what starts to jump out at you. Look at the inventory list. Like most people have inventories listed on their websites, and research the markets. For the most part, there's not a lot. So, this is a whole, I don't want to get too detailed and bore everybody, but then you have to kind of pick which market. Do I want a turnkey in Memphis? Do I want a turnkey in Harrisburg? Do I want whatever? And so, it's a little bit of just exploration to kind of see what market stands out to you. Do any of the companies in particular stand out to you? I have a turnkey rental properties Facebook group, which hopefully they're all listening. People talk about their experiences with different providers. Like, what do you guys think about this market versus this market? Taking the time to explore, to find the one that excites you. And again, this is a no pressure, like you get to shop online. Like I want that property. And, so you kind of start narrowing down, and then you get in touch with, whoever's in charge of that. And so then the buying process, if you find a house and you're like, I want that one, you put a reservation form in for it. They will put you in touch with the seller. The seller sends you a sales contract, and you put your earnest money down. Most cases, that's like $5,000. I've heard of a couple of cases like $1,000, whatever, basically to say, yes, I'm serious about this property. And then some of the properties, when you put them under contract, are already rehabbed, and maybe even with tenants, like they might be ready to go. Or properties also sell really fast, so the rehab may not have happened yet. If that's the case, nothing really happens until the rehab is complete, because at that point you're going to get a property inspection. This is your due diligence period, basically verifying everything about this property for yourself. You don't want to take their word for their numbers. You don't want to take the word for quality rehab. You want to get the property inspector, run something like good Rent Facts Pro, something to, look up the comps, make sure everything seems whatever. And all the while you're working with your lender if you're financing, and then basically you close on the property. And the idea is some of the turnkey companies will sell you a property without tenants already placed. I'm not a big fan of that at all. I think it brings in added risk. Most of the turnkey companies will hold off on closing until a tenant's in, because the whole idea, the metaphor is you stick the key in the door and turn it, and you're making cash flow on day one. Yeah. So that's the premise. And, and then after that, it's really just communication with the property managers. But yeah, it's, like I said, it's really just sales contract, earnest money, due diligence period, close. And so it's really that due diligence period that people, need a little help with, of like, what things should I check? And, that's where we kind of step in.
On the flip side to that, there's been some horror stories that I've heard of when it comes with a tenant that they just put any Tom, Dick, and Harry in there to fill the vacancy. So make sure that you look at the screening of the tenant, how they screened them and what quality tenant, because after you purchase this, you don't want, some horror stories in the next few months coming down from it. And getting good qualified tenants in there that are going to stay a long time, that treat it like a quality home of their own. It is very, very crucial in the rental game. So.
And that's part of that due diligence period is, property inspection is probably the biggest thing. And then double checking all the numbers. Those are the two biggest. But then it's like, who are the people in this property? And I was working with a woman who's buying right now in Atlanta, and she actually went to it. Most people buy sight unseen. Yeah. But she actually went to Atlanta, was checking all the properties. And one of the properties she had put under contract, the tenants were just hellacious. And she ended up getting out of that property because the tenants were so bad. Like the house was great, everything was whatever, but the tenants were terrible. And, it's funny because that's the most important thing, but people don't always think to check on the tenants. My whole experience, I've now owned rental properties for 9 years, basically. Yeah. And I will say the absolute number one biggest expense that I've had is bad tenants. Every single time the turnovers end up atrociously expensive. Insurance can't help. Yeah, exactly. Your description of the dream tenant is what I would consider a dream tenant. And it's not a guarantee. And, another thing about that too is what state are you investing in? Is it landlord friendly or tenant friendly? Like I'm in California, it's a very tenant friendly state. So good luck evicting anybody. And, versus Georgia, if, not with COVID so much, but, evictions are easy peasy. Like if they don't perform, you can get them out in 30 to 45 days. Whereas California, it could go on. I've heard horror stories of years and they can't get rid of a bad tenant.
Yeah, I mean, minimum is like 6 months. That's why we prefer out here in California, we prefer to do Airbnb, the short-term rentals.
So you can get out.
So it's like, hey, keep it moving. Keep
it moving, people. Keep it moving.
and then the numbers work out well for us because we do the burst strategy. So we need to get the income that's producing to increase to actually try to get those 1% to 2% rules, which is difficult by itself out here with the numbers. But
it's funny with California. So I guess 2.5 years ago, some partners and I, so this whole time I've been working with turnkeys and I was writing for Bigger Pockets and all that. And everything I wrote was like, buy with positive cash flow, don't buy at the top of the market, don't be a landlord, all these things. So me and some partners bought a duplex local to me. It's only about a mile away in Venice Beach. I am the landlord. It was a negative cash flow situation and we bought when it was super expensive. I was everything I've ever preached, I bought. And yeah. And it's, so it's interesting because now I'm the landlord because there's no reason to have property managers when it's literally a mile. But, in buying that property, it's a long-term play. That's, why we're okay with negative cash flow right now. But the tenant thing, because of California, especially right now with the COVID and eviction, I don't know why I said the COVID, with COVID and the eviction moratoriums and all that kind of stuff, like we have a unit vacant right now. And I am moving so slowly and putting anyone in there because literally with the eviction moratoriums, they could come in and never pay me a dime and I can't get rid of them. And so, we're treading really lightly, but yeah, just, talking about California dynamics versus like other states. But these are things you want to think about is like, and, the property managers hopefully are the ones to help, like what is the eviction scenario? Like this is also part of your due diligence is even before you put a property under contract, learn about that state. Is it landlord friendly? Is it tenant friendly? If it's landlord friendly, what are your property managers? How do they help mitigate that? It doesn't mean you shouldn't buy there, but like, what are those mitigations? Like, so just learning about the market you're choosing, learning, having those communications with the people who are boots on the ground in that area that you're buying.
I love that. So what would you recommend for somebody just getting started on cash flow wise? Like what should people be shooting for? And I know this is a blanket statement, right? Because it depends on the market, depends on the asset.
I was just going to say, it depends.
It depends on like a dozen of different factors, but is there like a certain minimum that you personally like to shoot for?
It depends. The two things that I think about, because even for myself, like ignoring my local negative cash flow property, if I'm out buying turnkeys or rental properties, whatever, and my goal is cash flow, two things I think about. Number one, part of this exploration is when you shop. I tell people shop around. It's like if you're trying to buy a car, like, so I drive a 2002 car. I like old car. Well, I can't even believe I'm saying it's an old car. It's 2002, but it's old. And I knew exactly the car I wanted. And it's one of those cars where it's actually an SUV, but the Blue Book value isn't like, you would never get one that cheap because everybody wants these cars. And so the only way that I knew the deal that I got was good was by shopping around because I knew the comparisons. I was like, oh, I test drove that one. It was in terrible shape. It was X number of dollars. Then this one, like it actually took me 6 months to find this car, but 6 months of looking for that kind of car, I knew when I found the one that I ended up getting, it was a good deal. That's, people are like, how do I know if I'm getting a good deal? Well, shop around. And so same with turnkeys, look at the different companies, look at the different markets. And let's say that you are buying in Indianapolis, for example, and you'll see all the Indianapolis properties and you'll see the range that they offer. So you'll know if you're getting a good deal or not because, how generally priced everything is. So that's number one is shop around. Because I feel like that's the only way to really know that you're landing, and it doesn't mean it's a bad deal, but like you'll know. Yeah. But the more important kind of technical side of this is the risk spectrum. So if I'm going to take on what I would perceive to be a much riskier property, I want projected cash flow to be pretty high because I don't want low projected cash flow and risk. I'm going to do one or the other. I either want way less risk, like I'm willing to take a lower cash flow if my risk is significantly lowered. So if you get a really nice property in like say a B+ to A- neighborhood, good schools, not that these exist in turnkey world all that much, but a really nice property where it's not a guarantee, but you're more likely to attract really good tenants, long-term tenants, all that kind of stuff. In that case, I'm willing to take a much lower cash flow because it's a risk trade-off. It's a long-term kind of play, whatever, versus, if I'm going to take on a sketchier neighborhood, maybe I'm hoping on gentrification, the tenants might be a little riskier. I better be, there better be a trade-off for that. Like I'm not doing that for fun. So that's why I tell people is it's going to vary between the markets. So like Atlanta now, I talked about Atlanta for my own properties. Atlanta now is very high priced. Like right now, the turnkeys we're working with there, and they're actually not even turnkeys, they're off-market properties, which means they may or may not even be rehabbed. We're only talking like a 5% cap rate. 5 to 5.5% cap rate, which I would consider incredibly low. Versus like Chicago, you can get upwards of like 9 to 10% cap rate. But it's the differences in the properties. The properties are totally different grades. The neighborhoods are very different grades. Georgia's tenant friendly. Illinois is landlord friendly. You want to look at all those different factors. And that's part of that exploration phase of getting a feel for what contribute, because it's like cash flow is king, but how are you going to sustain that cash flow? Because people can write on a sheet of paper all day long how much cash flow you're going to make, but you may never see a penny of that if it isn't sustained. So what are those things? Tenant quality, eviction laws, all that kind of stuff. So, to kind of go back and answer your question, on the turnkeys, the cap rates are ranging between 5 and 10%. What that translates to as far as the cash on cash depends on your financing. But, ultimately I'm looking for some kind of margin. Like if I'm making $100 to $200 a month after all expenses or whatever, right now, that's okay. But maybe not if I spent $200,000, like if it's a $75,000 property. Okay, what does that turn out to be cash on cash? I would prefer double digits cash on cash for sure. And some of the numbers don't work out where if you're going to finance, the cash on cash ends up being lower than the cap rate. So, really what is the return on the money? If it's a 10% cash on cash return if that's a low risk kind of thing, cool, because you're also making money in several other different directions on a rental property. It's not just the cash flow. You've got appreciation, you have tax benefits, all this kind of stuff. So that completely doesn't answer your question, but it is all the things that I look for.
No, I love it. There is many, it's a blanket statement. So there's many different ways to go about it to really figure it out. And I love your answer when it comes down to it depends, as well as like your research. So, figuring out and comparing, shopping around is really what's going to help out.
And shopping around is fun. Like, you just, make it fun and then just find the thing, and I used to joke back, I actually still joke about it. So when I was buying in Atlanta, when, this was like turnkey, investors were just eating up properties, not just in Atlanta, everywhere. And I had made one of my criteria is like, I of course want the numbers. I of course want the good neighborhood, whatever. But once I have a pile of those properties, I'm going for the cute one. I want a cute property. So it became kind of a long running joke of like, oh, Ali wants, is it cute enough? And I'm like, and then as prices got higher and I kept saying properties are getting less and less cute by the minute. And people are like, is cute really one of your criteria? And I'm like, it's not the primary criteria, however. If I think it's cute, other people are going to think it's cute. It helps my exit strategy.
It's a smart move. So, Ali, how can people get a hold of you and any final thoughts?
Yeah, have fun with it. My final thought is buy my book. It's not just to promote my book for sake of promoting, is my whole goal with the book. So it's called Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing. And I was very strategic about that because I feel like, most of the time when you type in how to be a real estate investor, all anyone ever offers you is a how-to guide, how to flip a property, how to wholesale, if they even tell you that much. But it doesn't help you figure out what to do. I'm in turnkeys, maybe turnkeys aren't for you. So it's that exploration phase. So I tried to make this book, it's more of a mindset book. And it's really I tried to make it fun. I tried to make it not stuffy. And it's a fun read, but gives you things to think about, like as you're trying to figure out what route you want to go or how to get started in that. And I actually 5 super successful investors in different strategies, I interview them in the book. So you can kind of get like a day in the life of feeling, because it's like, oh, flipping properties is so glorious. Well, what is it actually? And like, what does your life look like if you actually are doing that? So, really buy the book, or actually I'm going to offer you a free copy of the book. Read the book, but really take that time to figure out what really is right for you. And like we said, kind of coming full circle is real estate investing is such a unique and cool industry. It'd be so great if more people got into it. But like we said, people kind of go flying off into the deep end, they get burned, and then they're traumatized. They don't want to get back into it. I meet those people all the time. So if you are just getting started, slow down. I know it's not the more fun route, but slow down, take the time to really kind of explore, see what's out there and see what makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish. And as far as getting a hold of me, so I actually did set up a link so everyone, if you want, can get a free digital copy of the book. My company's name is Hipster Investments. So if you go to hipsterinvestments.com/ready-set-book, you can get a free copy of the book. The only thing I ask in exchange is pretty please, if you read it, leave an Amazon review, because I'm a brand new author and I'm in that every review counts stage. So I'd be super appreciative for any review that any review from anybody. If you don't have to give me a 1-star, that'd be cool. I'm like, oh yeah, give me any review. Any review is fine. Well,
That's awesome. And not to get political or anything, but when it comes down to potential taxes being raised, it's almost like necessity or need to get some real estate just for the write-offs and so forth that you can capitalize on. So,
well, and actually it's funny you say that. So my dad's a little bit into investing. We were just talking the other day, and one thing that I've been thinking about with not even just the political situation with COVID, with basically our world is in question. Like, what the heck is going on? And with so much uncertainty, people start getting nervous. And the thing that I think about is, what is one absolute surefire fact that we know? People are always going to need somewhere to live.
yes.
Period. So from an because what got us talking about this is my dad was like, I'm pretty sure with the economy and everything going on, like we're about to have a economic crisis. Well, I guess we're kind of in one, but like what's going to happen to the dollar? We're even in a coin shortage. We don't have coin, like people can't use quarters for their washing machines. There's no quarters. And so like, what's going to happen with money? Like, what is the future of the currency of money? And so my dad was talking about like, should I invest in gold? Like, how do we mitigate this? And I was like, so I was thinking about it for myself as like, people are going to have somewhere to live.
Yep.
Period. No matter what happens in this apocalyptic world, potentially, people have to have somewhere to live. So an investment standpoint, I mean, I don't want to say real estate surefire because that could give a wrong message, but like people are going to have somewhere to live.
Clothes, food, and shelter. It's right there. So.
Yeah, you can't get around it. So, investing in real estate, I think, and it's funny too, because with everything going on in the world, God bless 2020, I have not been this busy with real estate in maybe 3 or 4 years. I mean, between interest rates being super low and properties are flying off the shelves. And with the foreclosure moratoriums, a lot of the turnkey providers are either out or running out of inventory because they can't get the foreclosure properties right now. It's funny. It's like, it's a feeding frenzy right now. And you couldn't have paid me to expect that's what was going to come out of 2020 on the real estate front. But, the turnkeys are either small multifamilies, but mostly single families. And, de-densification is happening. People are flocking out of crowded apartment buildings, trying to get into the suburbs, away from other people. They want to get away from germs. People are spending so much time working from home now, being at home. They want somewhere more comfortable. And all of a sudden, the turnkeys are just flying off the shelves.
I love it. Well, Ali, I appreciate you so much. I really do. You guys definitely want to reach out to her. Take advantage of getting the free ebook and just connect with her. She's awesome. And as always, if you want to get a hold of me, you can always do so on Instagram. It's Brandon Elliott Investments. Otherwise, Facebook.com/Brandon Elliott Investor. Otherwise, if you need any credit repair done for you service, we can fix your credit. You can always reach out at creditrepairmobile.com. Or if you're looking to get educated and really take your credit to the next level, fix your own credit, build up your own credit, get multiple 6 figures in funding and so forth to be able to leverage it successfully into real estate, then creditcounselelite.com. Hope you guys are all doing well, and we'll see you on the very next episode. Hit that subscribe button and leave a review. Let us know what you guys think about it. Till next time, guys, stay blessed.
This has been another episode of Ready, Set, Go Real Estate Investing Podcast, brought to you by Brandon Elliott. For more information, please visit BrandonElliottInvestments.com. Also, please don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. Thanks again for joining. Until next time, God bless.